Hello everyone, I'm Brian. Today I'm reacting to Mine Alone is Bondage and Liberation, Acharya Prashant on Upanishad 2024. Okay, on. I thought it might have been like not on, but like a different word. I was just making sure. So anyways, I was looking around and I saw this like, you know what? He's not wrong. In terms of amazingly when I try to think of a time when what I would consider bondage or suffering. I'd say the body, the emotion, and perhaps the mind. But then now, whenever, with this being said, and I think about it again, I guess my answer would be just the mind to some degree, I suppose. Because obviously, you have pain in the body for survival purposes, like I said, Guru says. And it's very true, whenever you get a cut, you want to know you got cut because you could be bleeding out. And you want to make sure you know that because you don't want to bleed out. But in terms of, I guess, outside of physical trauma, it's very much so that the mind is our bondage. Um, Interesting here, he says liberation as well, when the mind, at least in terms of Advaita Vedanta, as far as I know, is finding out your true self, which is not the mind. But again, I think Acharya, I believe he, again, I don't know. I've listened to a lot of his stuff, but he doesn't. He talks about discovering your true self, but I don't know if he means the Atman or the mind, or are they one and the same, or are they different? That's the one thing. So far, I've in one of the videos there. I believe they're one and the same, which I don't know if I could say. I'd say they're different personally, just because um, or you could say it's the same, depending on your outlook. The materialistic view of me, say the mind and your consciousness are in fact one and the same. Um, because um, again, I'm trying to think of this on the spot. I'm trying to think of the materialistic point of view and also Advaita Vedanta. So, as far as I know and understand from Advaita Vedanta, it's the fact that your consciousness is your true self, which is if you really strip your emotions and everything, memory from it, that is who you are. You do not have a personality. You don't have these baggages, this suffering and happiness. You are who you are. Content, and that is it. Never disappointed, never happy, but you never suffer. Um, but the mind is something that, generally speaking, is the how do I say what's in a sense created in this world, because it is influenced by external things and your mind kind of develops with that kind of perception. But anyways, I'd like to hear what he has to say, especially about this, and whether is there a separation between Atma and the mind according to Acharya here. So let's go and get started.
I'll begin with the explanation. So, we'll have this session, welcome everybody, in two parts. In the first part, we'll cover some fundamentals of Advaita Vedanta. I'll try to take it up in a way that one single shlok verse unfolds to reveal us the complete essence of Vedanta. So the verse we are beginning with is, I suppose all of us are carrying pen and a sheet of paper. Right. So this comes from the Upanishads. As we know, Vedant is synonymous with Upanishads, though if you ask technically, Vedant comprises of not just the Upanishads, but also the Bhagavad Gita and the Vedanta Sutra or Brahma Sutra of Badrayana or Ved Vyas. So, what we are taking up is this. Man ev manushyanam karanam bandha mokshayoh. And this comes from the Brahma Bindu Upanishad. Man ev manushyanam karanam bandha mokshayoh. Translated, it would read, the mind alone is the cause of both bondage and liberation. Bondage and liberation. Now, starting from here, we'll venture deeper. Whose bondage? Whose liberation? This question is extremely important in Vedanta. And the one who is at the center of attention is nobody else but the self, I, me, the questioner, the seeker. So Vedanta begins with an admission of one's suffering. One feels suffocated. One feels hurt, wounded, betrayed. And all these are cumulatively termed as bondages. Bondages. So freedom from the usual state of the self, the I, the ego, is the ultimate objective of Vedanta. So liberation is the goal. Liberation of the ego, the little self, the me, the I, from its usual state. My usual state is not something I can be contented with. Therefore, I seek change. Change not just nominal, superficial, but very fundamental. I just don't want to dress up to please or deceive myself. I don't want a little bit of cosmetic shift in the way I am or in the way I experience. I want my very foundation to be different. I want my deepest center to change. I want to be a different existence altogether, a different being. That is the purpose of Vedanta, right? So, little bit of change, cosmetic change, can be brought about by things as frivolous as entertainment. In fact, that's a good definition of entertainment. Something that brings about a temporal, superficial, frivolous change in the state of consciousness. That's entertainment. So had we been targeting just a nominal change, any kind of entertainment would have sufficed. But that's not what Vedanta is shooting at. Vedanta is very ambitious in that regard. If I am suffering, I want to go to the very core of my suffering. I want to understand its genesis. And I want to be completely liberated from suffering. That's what Vedanta targets. So, bandha mokshayo. Bandhan, bondage, my bondage. It all begins with me. So, basics. Vedant is about me, and this question Vedant will keep throwing at us. Just when we are about to unconsciously slip into the sensual world, Vedant will just shake us up and ask, well, who is the one who is slipping? Who is the one getting entertained? Who is the one talking about all the things that have become so important to you? And then we'll find ourselves with a look aghast. We had come up with a matter that we termed as important. Vedant turns around and asks, to whom is it important? To whom is it important? And if the important thing is important to you, aren't you more important than even the most important thing that's important to you? That's a very fundamental question. Koham. Who am I? Who is the one at the center of all the activity? You'll go to a seer, a sage, with some important matter. And the first thing the sage would ask is, to whom is the matter important? Don't say the matter is important. There is no objective truth. What is important to one person is totally unimportant to another.
Then wouldn't you say that would be a subjective truth? Perhaps you're saying there is no objective truth? Hmm. Objective truth. I mean, can we not say 1 plus 1 equals 2 as an objective truth? But perhaps he means it something else, as in more of a personal truth, as in what individuals value, and saying that it's objectively true, when in reality, per individual, there's no objective. Well, per individual, there is no global objective truth. I might be confusing you guys here and myself, but I guess because it's kind of weird to say there's no objective truth. We objectively know that 1 plus 1 equals 2 in terms of the objective reality of this world. Uh, the sun will rise. Obviously, it's not guaranteed, but generally speaking, it is objectively true that the sun will rise, tomorrow, in the morning, in the afternoon. It'll be up in the sky. Um, but to say individually, no objective truths in terms of what you say is true is not objectively true to the rest of the world. So therefore, it should be a subjective truth. I wonder if he means it that way. Again, these are just questions. I'm not stating this as facts. But it's kind of weird to say there's no objective truth. Let's actually rewind that. Important, there's no objective truth. Let's go one more.
There is no objective truth. What is important to one person is totally unimportant to another.
Yeah, so this is very much, it's not, perhaps the word objective truth is not the right word. Or maybe, again, like what he's trying to say is that to an individual person, what he believes to be an objective truth is not an objective truth, but a subjective truth. What he believes to be important may not be important to anyone else.
So it's not that the matter in itself intrinsically holds some importance. Had the matter had some innate importance, the importance would have been universal and common to all experiencers, not just all human beings, but also the other animate beings. But that's not how we see. Right? What is very important to one is a trivial thing to the other. So Vedanta keeps the center right at the center. Is never forget who you are. In fact, forgetfulness of who you are is the very cause of suffering. So do not forget who you are. So when we talk of all these big things, the mind, the world, the entire expanse of spiritual jargon, Vedanta says, well, keep one very little thing, that small letter right at the center, I. It's all for me. It's all for me. I am suffering, hence there is Vedanta, and whether or not Vedanta has succeeded on me will be decided by only one criteria. Am I still the same person? Is my vision still clouded? Am I cluttered or clear?
I thought he would say, "Am I suffering?"
Can I see things clearly? And can I see myself very, very clearly? That's the question Vedanta poses. So, manev manushyanam karanam bandhamokshayo. What is the mind? If it's all about the I, what is the mind then? Vedanta will not allow us to proceed with common and pedestrian notions or definitions. Definition, by definition, must be very sharp and precise. So what is the mind? If it's all about me, what is the mind then? Vedanta gives a very sharp definition. The mind is the entire set, the whole universe of objects that the I has a relationship with. Not the entire set of everything that is there in the universe. One does not have a relationship with everything. But whatsoever one develops a relationship with becomes mind. Objects in general are called vastu, just vastu. But the object becoming the mind is called vishay. So an object untouched by the self, the ego, is just an object. But the moment the object is touched by I, it becomes vishay or mind. And mind is an accumulation, a congregation of objects that it is in relationship with. So there is the object, there is me, there is a relationship in between, and the complete set of all such objects is called the mind. I'm fond of saying that the mind is the whole society, the entire locality, the whole population around the center called I. The neighborhood of I is called the mind. I is at the center, and it has managed to settle an entire neighborhood around itself. That neighborhood is called the mind. Now, the conscious entity is I, irrespective of the degree of consciousness it has. If I were to be fully conscious, it would be the liberated self. But the I cannot manage to be totally unconscious. Even if we want to, we cannot afford to be totally unconscious ever. Even the most unconscious person retains a modicum of consciousness. That's a liability we carry. That's an existential obligation. As long as you are, you can never be fully unconscious. So there is the I.
Hold on, real quick with that one. Now, amazingly, I saw this YouTube video about a doctor doing an experiment on people who are unconscious or in a coma, on a coma actually. And what they said is, again, I don't know how true this is, but ironically, when they asked the person to think of a memory, a particular memory, a certain pattern in their brain will light up. When they ask them to think of a different memory, say one is eating at a kitchen table and one is swimming in a swimming pool, those two patterns will light up in a very particular pattern in the brain because they're different memories. And what they do is they ask this of a person that's in coma, and they get those signals. And then what they say, they ask them a question, and they say, think of the eat in the kitchen if it's a yes, or the pool if it's a no. And they ask a question, and if the person says yes, they'll think of eating in the kitchen, and those particular brain patterns will light up in their mind. And then if they ask them another question and say no, the pool will light up in their mind. Now, again, I don't know how true that is. This kind of goes to the fact of that even someone who's in a coma is still kind of conscious. Again, I don't know how true that is, but it's something that I've heard. And YouTube, obviously, everything on YouTube is true. Everything on the internet is true, without a doubt. But it would be just kind of interesting. I mean, he it's very odd that he pointed that fact out that like even when we're unconscious, we still have some semblance of consciousness there.
And there is the entire universe, and the I wants to strike a relationship with certain objects in the universe. The objects that it manages to have a relationship with constitute the mind. You would ask, why at all must the I have a relationship with stuff? Because the I, the ego, which is at the center of all inquiry and all seeking, is by definition an incomplete entity. It's called aham. Vedanta calls it as aham. Aham denotes the sense of self defined by constant unease and therefore a constant striving. I'm not well. I'm not at ease. I'm not well. I'm not complete. I'm not secure. That's what the I is. And since this is the way the I is, hence Vedanta, else there was no need to explore and look for a treatment. The I says, I'm not well. Therefore, there is a need to seek something that would treat it and restore health to it. So the I says, I'm not all right. I'm not satisfied. I'm not well. I'm not home. Therefore, something must happen. Since I'm not complete, therefore, something must be added to me. The status quo won't do, because the status quo is suffering. things as they are right now cannot be allowed to continue because I don't feel well.
This sounds very much like the person is not in content. This is something I've said in the very beginning. I'm not saying that I've said earlier on in my reaction to this video is that I'm content. I'm not happy, but I'm not sad, but I'm content. And I don't believe being in content means you're sad or you're suffering or that you're lacking in life. It's not at all. It's a very much a very medium feeling. Happy, suffering, meh. I don't know. It's like content.
The ego is something that never feels quite well about itself. I don't feel well. Something ought to change. And how can I bring about change? By relating with the universe. What is my universe? Largely, it is defined by the scope of my senses. But because the senses will not suffice, therefore the sixth sense comes into question, which is the ability to imagine, picturize, and conceptualize. So I can see things and have a relationship with them in order to feel better. And if I cannot see things or hold them or touch them, I proceed to imagine things in order to feel better. But I must feel better. My present state is of distinct unease. Something needs to be done. I'm suffering. I need to add something to myself, or I need to subtract something from myself. I need to paint myself in another color. I need to become somebody else.
Man, that's the kind of things that you see in a lot of people today where they're constantly buying things because they're, well, not content with their life. To buy the most latest purse or the most latest phone or the most latest car or house or album or whatever it is. And then their hairstyles, like, oh, they always have to change, always have to be up to date, always have to be ahead of the game. And that's what it sounds like he's talking about to me. Now, I'm kind of curious, does someone else hear something different? Because, he's saying the way I am now is not good enough. I need to be better. There's something lacking in my life, and that very much points to like rich people or people who are just, how do I say, I don't know, like, well, I guess lacking in their life, really. Like, they have to have the latest and greatest. They have to look the best ever. They always have to have their hair done. They always have to be the top number one of whatever they're doing. They have to have the number one hairstyle. They have the number one dress. They have the number one walk, the number one cell phone, the number one purse. And those things change all the time. So they always have to have number one. They always have to have more money. Money's never enough. Well,
That's how the ego keeps uttering. So the ego says, I don't feel secure. Can I add a little house to myself? You say, I don't feel secure. Can I add a teeny weeny partner to myself? Oh, I don't feel complete. Can I add a few members to my family? I don't feel sufficient. Can I add a few zeros to my bank balance? That's how the ego operates. And in all matters of operation of the ego, an object is related to. An object is clutched. That clutching is called the mind. The ego is sticky, like a child afraid. Once it gets hold of something, it won't loosen the grip. All the things that the ego grips together constitute the mind. And the ego, in its own view, has a valid reason to clutch at things. The valid reason is, I am insufficient, incomplete. Obviously, I cannot continue the way I am. Therefore, I must take help of the world. There are then two worlds. There is the universe of objects and there is a universe of relationships. For the ego, it is the world of objects that constantly keeps becoming the world of relationships. The ego cannot afford to let objects continue as objects. If there is an object, for the ego, it must be my object. The ego is not at peace letting the world of objects be. The ego says, oh, that thing in the window of the shop means nothing. It must turn into my thing. The ego will look at a beautiful flower and pluck it and say, it must become my flower. The ego is incapable of remaining aloof and detached and just appreciating from a distance. It is so insecure, it wants to pluck all the flowers and store them somewhere in its own custody, in its own power and possession. That's how the ego is. Do we see what then the mind is? All the flowers that the ego has managed to pluck and salt and secure. Also, the ego, being afraid, wants to keep certain things at bay. The objects that the ego does not like, they too constitute the mind, because dislike is as much of a relationship as like. So both these relationships exist. There is something that is in the mind because it is pleasant, and there is something there is in the mind because it is very unpleasant, rather threatening. So these two become the basic instincts, greed and fear. I remember something because it was very pleasant. I also remember something because it was very unpleasant. Both these things become the mind.
You crave for something that's pleasant, and you want to keep having more and more of it because you greed that, and the thing that was very unpleasant, you don't want it, so you fear it.
What's common is that the ego has a stake in remembering both those things. So, मन एव मनुष्याणाम कारणम बंध मोक्षयो. The ego is in a state of bondage. That's how it looks at itself. In its own view, that's how it is. I am, and I'm not well. You ask ego, who are you and how are you? It will say, I do exist. I'm not fictional. I am, and I'm not well. I am, and I'm not well. So wellness has to be achieved. How is wellness to be achieved? There is only one way, the world of objects. Once you are born into a world of objects, right?
Yeah, I was gonna say like your ego will feel fine temporarily when it gets what it wants, but that is a very temporary thing. Eventually, what makes you well doesn't make you well anymore because it's not good enough anymore. Because it's old now and it's used and it's not the hip greatest thing anymore. So you crave the next best thing to make you well again. But the problem with the one thing that you want that makes you well, there's about six other things that you need to also make you well. So while you grab that one thing to make you well, you are well because of this one thing, but unwell because there's five other things that you want to make you well. And by the time you grab those other five things, this first thing is no longer making you well. You want the other thing that makes you well.
There are these senses, and these senses are always perceiving objects.
Oh yeah.
So that, gladly or sadly, is the only way then to proceed. It's like being born in a jungle. Even if you want to get out of the jungle, you will have to navigate through the jungle. So there is this jungle of objects all around us, even as we are born. The kid opens her eyes and sees things. So there are things. How then must we tackle this very important and very serious question? The question of bondage and suffering. Vedanta says the answer lies in right relationship. Right relationship. Man ev. There is no other answer except right relationship. Ev means he. Exclusively the mind. Nothing else but the mind. That is what ev denotes. Nothing else but the mind will bring you to bondage, deeper bondage, or to liberation. Nothing but the mind. What is implied? The implication is there is the world and you exist in it. At least that's how you perceive your situation. You better have the discretion, vivek, to choose the right objects to associate with. How is a right object chosen? First of all rightness is with respect to myself. I am not well. Therefore, that lack of wellness will decide the rightness of the object. The attractiveness of the object will not decide its rightness. The usefulness of the object will decide its rightness. The Upanishads put it this way: not pray, but shreya. Do not go by what is pleasant to you. Go by what is helpful to you. Never forget that you are diseased. You do not need to titillate your taste buds. You need to restore your health. Pray means that which is pleasant or attractive. Shreya means that which is helpful. And it is very difficult because the ego, by its very constitution, is drawn towards stuff that it likes. The ego lacks self-knowledge. It does not know who it is, but it feels that it suffers. You understand? Happens with most of us. You have something in your stomach, a little ulcer, let's say, a bit of a tumor, something. You don't know what exactly is the ailment, but you experience the suffering, right? So that's how the ego is. It experiences suffering without knowing why it suffers. Therefore, it gives false treatments to its suffering. All that which appears pleasant to us is actually a case of false treatment that the ego wants to give itself. And false treatments are known to fatally aggravate the disease. Please understand. The ego feels, experiences, something is not wrong with me. Something is wrong with me. We all do that. But it requires a certain effort and a certain expertise to know what actually is wrong and with whom is the problem. The ego has neither that expertise nor usually the inclination. Therefore, it just experiences a certain unease without knowing what the unease is about and to whom is the unease. Therefore, driven by the unease, without knowing the unease, it proceeds towards things that it just likes. That's called prayer. It's called prayer. So the usual relationship of the ego is a relationship in blindness. I'm not okay, I don't feel okay, therefore I rush towards something that I feel will be good for me. Feel will be good for me. And when you do not know what the disease is, then it's very likely that you will pop up pills that are either totally irrelevant or even quite dangerous.
I'm going to pause it right there. What I also got from that, I don't know if I misheard or something, it seems like what the ego also seems to be doing is finding these cures. It's like, oh man, this will make me feel better. This must be the cure. So this is not curing me. Oh, this must be the cure. This must be the cure. It's the same analogy as in this makes me feel better, this makes me feel better. But you keep, what you're doing is you're trying to make yourself feel better with all these temporary things and not finding out what's really causing the suffering. What's really causing the suffering, sorry. So, but yeah, it sounds like we're constantly trying to feed our ego something that will cure us, something that will make us happy, but not realizing these are all temporary and these are all not cures at all. And we keep fooling ourselves into it. We're constantly being pulled more into this illusion of happiness. In reality, it's not. Anyways, at least that's part 1 of Mine Alone is Bondage and Liberation. If you like my content, please consider subscribing. Thumbs up the sound down below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next vid.